For years, the Food and Drug Administration and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have had complementary roles in creating vaccine policy in the United States. But the federal administration's recent announcement of an evidence-based approach to COVID-19 vaccination represents a departure from the way in which the FDA previously made vaccine policy and its role in this work. I'm Stephen Morrissey, managing editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, and I'm talking with Peter Marks, former director of the FDA Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. Dr. Marks has written a perspective article about U.S. public health agencies and vaccine policy making. Dr. Marks, historically, what's been the FDA's role in creating vaccine policy in this country?
Historically, FDA is charged with looking at data submitted by the vaccine manufacturers and looking at the information about the quality with which the vaccines are made, that is, how they're manufactured and where they're manufactured, and looking at their safety and efficacy profile from clinical trials in order to make a determination that they are safe and effective for their labeled uses. And at the end of the day, the FDA is responsible for making sure that the package insert or the prescribing information is appropriate and that it comports with that information that was submitted.
And then what's been the role of the CDC in making vaccine policy decisions?
So the CDC takes that information on the label and looks at it in the broader context of other information that may be available related to public health. That is, there may be information that is available from other sources, other studies that have been done, real-world evidence that they can look at to determine that the vaccine could best be applied in a given manner. Most of the time, but not all the time, it ends up being applied in a manner that is consistent with the FDA label. But sometimes CDC would determine that perhaps a given age range or a given regimen might be altered subtly or not so subtly in order to best address public health needs.
In your article, you describe the administration's announcement of a, quote, evidence-based approach to COVID-19 vaccination. So what is this new approach?
To the best that I can discern, they tried to take information available from select sources and try to apply it to what they felt was an approach to which parts of the population to vaccinate. That is traditionally in the realm of what CDC does. And I respectfully disagree with the way the data was parsed, because the manufacturers submitted data that the vaccines were safe and effective across the entire age range for use in a what I would consider overstep of the FDA's role. They decided to limit the use of these vaccines based on what I would assume, again, I can only assume because I don't know what was behind it, what they would consider benefit risk considerations. That perhaps they felt that somehow the benefits did not outweigh the risks, despite the fact that those determinations were made multiple times in the past by both FDA and CDC independently.
So you've talked about the available data. What, in fact, do the data show about the safety and effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines?
I think, obviously, we could spend a long time talking about this, but I think the COVID-19 vaccines that are available in the United States, the 2 mRNA vaccines and the 1 protein-based vaccines, are relatively safe vaccines. It is true that there have been cases of myocarditis, roughly about 1 in 100,000 across the age ranges when averaged, but they've generally been pretty safe vaccines and have been associated with overall, over time, reduction in emergency department visits, reduction in hospitalizations. And if you look over the larger COVID-19 pandemic, were associated with very significant reductions in the number of lives lost. So I think what we know is that those facts, reduction in emergency department visits and reduction in hospitalizations, continue with the evolution of SARS coronavirus 2, continue to apply in the recent years, where they apply not just to older individuals, but also to younger individuals. And so I think the benefit risks that we see, the evidence that we have, apply across the age ranges. And there's one area in particular, which I would call out, which is I think these benefits pretty clearly apply to pregnant women, because the data from large studies or aggregates of large studies using real-world evidence indicate that there is a reduction in maternal mortality as well as a reduction in neonatal mortality and neonatal intensive care utilization when these vaccines are administered. So again, I don't know exactly how they got there. And that actually goes to the other piece of this that I tried to point out in this article, which is that the lack of transparency makes it very difficult for someone to actually understand how they got there.
You write that although the administration has stated that it's committed to, quote, transparency and gold standard science, the issuance of the new policy appears to achieve neither of those objectives. So why is that the case?
Well, I think if you want to change a policy of who we're vaccinating dramatically, it would best be done after what we would traditionally have done, which would be putting out some type of briefing document, taking the issue to the advisory committee, in this case, the Vaccine and Related Biologic Products Advisory Committee at FDA, and having a discussion about whether the benefits and risks had changed over time to warrant some limitation in the label. In the absence of doing so, what we see is a very murky view into the thinking that went behind this. And it's very hard to understand whether a totality of all available evidence approach was used or whether very selective thinking went into what limited the use of these vaccines. I guess I would say one other piece that goes into this that's a little challenging is that I think that a public discussion of these issues would have brought to the forefront that some of what was done here in terms of coming up with the position that in younger individuals, people up to age 65, that they'd only be indicated for those with certain concomitant medical conditions. We know that that did not work well when we tried it once previously because it's very challenging to sort out these concomitant medical conditions. I mean, here's a great one. One of the concomitant medical conditions that's noted is physical inactivity. Now, what does that mean? And how does a pharmacist try to evaluate that? Does physical inactivity mean, well, do you sit around more than 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day, 4 hours a day? Is physical inactivity because I'm just sitting here in my room for several hours before I go to get vaccinated? So I don't mean to be flip about it, but what has happened here is because of the lack of a public vetting where more minds, more input can lead to a more robust solution. My prediction is that we will relive some of the challenges that we had in 2021 when we had such a similar way of using the vaccines, which we ended up having to move away from. It's very hard for pharmacists to document concomitant conditions and make a decision on whether to vaccinate someone. And it's confusing to patients as well. So I think this is something where, had there been a public vetting, some of the institutional memory would have been activated to bring that up and hopefully would have come to a more robust solution.
Finally, what implications do you think the administration's announcement and related actions on vaccine policy are going to have for vaccine research and development and for public confidence in vaccines in general?
So I am terribly worried about where we are headed currently in vaccines. Vaccine confidence is continuing to crater. Thankfully, perhaps a little less so because people are recognizing the value of measles vaccine, given that we have a measles outbreak in multiple states in the United States. But I think all of this confusion, this lack of clarity in who should be getting vaccines, and the value of vaccines is leading to an erosion in confidence that we really do not need at this point. Vaccines are among the most important public health measures that have ever been implemented. Traditionally, it was the job of the Food and Drug Administration of the United States to make sure that vaccines that were licensed in the United States met very high standards for having benefits that greatly outweighed any risks. And this confusion here that's being sown about the value of vaccines, some of which are unambiguous in terms of their benefits, I think could have far-reaching implications, particularly if we have another epidemic or pandemic where vaccination will be the best method for protecting the population, yet people may be hesitant to receive those vaccines. So I do worry about the downstream implications here and hope that there can be some interventions that will help bring us back to a place where vaccines take their rightful role as very important public health measures.
Thank you, Dr. Marks.